Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of No One's a Critic. We are Kino and Mac, your hosts, and I have some news, which is I fucked up. The reason you're getting this video late is because for some reason, stupid Zencaster, which we used to record this, decided that for some reason I wanted to record the audio through my webcam shitty audio microphone instead of my normal, just kind of shitty Yeti. So completely fucked up the audio for the last episode. So that's why we had to postpone this. And again, I apologize for that.
No worries. Um, yeah, I was telling you that happened to me at Discord. It'll just like randomly like, oh, you want to use like your webcam microphone, not this microphone that you've used like for the last like 3 months on this. I'm like, no, what the hell? Like, why would I
Yeah.
do that? Horrible story. When I was making my Watchmen video, which is
Mhm.
2 hours and 40 minutes,
Yeah.
um, and this is before I had like a decent mic set up. So I was recording in my closet with my laptop and a Blue Yeti, and it was horrible too because the AC was so loud. This was like during the summer. The
Yeah.
AC was so loud that I had to turn it off. So I'm like sweating buckets in like this closet, and I was doing it, and I'm a psycho, so I will like literally like I hate voice recording, so I'll do it in one sitting. So I did about an hour and a half recording session
Jeez.
of it, and then I realized that for whatever reason, Audacity had switched the input from my Blue Yeti
Oh
microphone
no.
to the microphone on the laptop, and it sounded
Oh
like shit.
no.
And I almost gave up on the project. I was so disheartened by it. But luckily we got through it and we came around. But
That is the worst. I don't know about
so
you, but I'm terrible at audio. Like I do not understand.
I hate it.
Like
I
like
hate it so
I,
bad.
I I don't know why. Like for some reason, a take will be really good, and the next time I go to record, it'll be awful. I don't really understand like decibels or like all the. I know to just not make it too loud so it doesn't like blow people's ears out. But other than that, I have no idea how to be like record quality audio. It's the part of the process of making videos that I think I absolutely suck at.
Or I just like I've kind of found a system for me, like
Yeah.
mic placement. I have the presets on my Audacity, so I kind of know how to make it sound somewhat similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's literally the worst part
Hmm.
of the experience for me. Between like I love writing, I love the video editing, but then every time it comes to, and I'm always like paranoid, like there's going to be construction outside, and
Hmm.
I have to like, it's literally my least favorite part of the process.
Well, you've improved
By
a
far.
lot because I saw the video you did, kind of taking another look at The Departed,
Oh God,
which I
yeah, great
loved. I
deal.
don't know. I actually thought that video was very interesting because that's a movie that I really enjoy. But thinking, I've always had like a problem when I watched it. I never was able to kind of articulate what it was. And you pointed out a lot of stuff in there that I was like, yeah, you're right. This kind of doesn't make sense. It's like very atmospheric. It's an enjoyable experience to watch it, but when you actually think about the individual parts, you're like, what the fuck is even happening here?
It's very, it's very similar to like I think my Saving Private Ryan video, where it's like it really shows how good of a director Scorsese is. That he can kind of make you overlook what are pretty, I would say, sizable flaws in the narrative, but he's able to kind of like make you look past that because of just how excellent of a director he is.
Oh yeah, it is. And the reason I brought that up was just because you showed your original video and the
Yeah.
audio in that one wasn't that great, but you had like improved a lot since then, and I think that's a very interesting journey to look at that.
Oh man, that audio was so. I was under. I said in the video, I was my Blue Yeti under my comforter. It was like
Yeah.
over my head. It was awful.
I know. But yeah, so in this episode, we are going to be talking about streaming services and the different quote unquote streaming wars going on. So as just like an icebreaker kind of question, what platforms do you like subscribe to? Do you use normally?
So me and my girlfriend, the way it usually works is so our kind of routine is she works a 9 to 5, so she'll go to work and then come home at around 5 or 6. I'm kind of all over the place. Like I technically have 4 jobs. I work at an animal adoption center. I work door at a bar. And then I do my own YouTube channel, and then I do YouTube consulting. So my hours are like when I'm home, when I'm at work, is like all over the place. But usually, in most cases, 6 o'clock to like 9 or 10 is like kind of our time where we make
Yeah.
dinner together. And we watch, and we usually like watch a movie. Right now, we're making our way through Degrassi, which
Oh,
is
nice.
awful, but where at least season 9 is. And so we have, let's see, we have Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney Plus. We had Paramount Plus for a little bit,
Mhm.
but it just was like
Yeah.
nothing on here. And yeah, we don't really use one more often than the other. We just kind of what if we're looking for a particular movie,
Yeah.
whatever service has that, or we'll just sort of like we'll go through Netflix if we find something we like, and
Mhm.
then we'll just keep going. We don't really have a. I guess if I had a preference, if like I could pick one, it would be HBO Max,
Oh,
obviously
yeah.
because The Sopranos, but
Oh,
also
yeah.
because I think in general they have the best selection of.
Oh, it's without a doubt, I think, the best app out there.
Mm,
Like you, I have a number of them. We've got the family Netflix account that we all share.
mhm.
You got to
Don't
have
tell Netflix
Netflix.
that. Tell them.
No, 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 no. Nowadays, you're actually gonna have like 4 different accounts on the same one, like son,
Oh,
mom, dad, whatever. But yeah, it used to be back in the day that you would all share the password, and it's funny. So I had someone else's account, like a friend of a friend, like a friend gave me someone else's, like one of their friends' accounts, and I signed into it on my iPod, or I think maybe it was an early iPhone that I just used as an iPod, and it was cool. Like back then, because it was like outdated, they didn't have the same functionality on the app that they have nowadays. So like the person could not like log me out of the app. Like nowadays you can like log everyone out if you're the owner and change
mhm.
the password. Because they realized that the passwords had gotten passed around. And so this person could not kick me off of their Netflix account no matter what they did. It would not prompt me to re-log in like it would nowadays. And so they got so pissed off that they were telling my friend like, I don't know who the fuck you gave this account to, but you need to tell them to fucking give it back because they couldn't watch at the same time I was watching. But now we have a legit Netflix account. Have HBO Max. I love it. I think it's the best app out there. I have AMC Plus for Better Call Saul now. I wanted to get the episodes right when they came out. I didn't want to bother trying to pirate it. We had Hulu for a while. Again, I think it was someone else's account we were borrowing. I had Peacock for a while. Yeah, that's we had Disney Plus for a while too, but we worked our way through the catalog, and then I was just like, I saw them all the movies once. I don't really want to watch them again.
Yeah. Now that you think of it, oh, yeah. Now that you think of it, I don't think. No, we had Paramount Plus. We never got That's Peacock is the one we never got. We never
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, I
bothered
got
with.
it. I wanted to watch something on there, so I subscribed for a week for free, and then I turned it off. Yeah, not a huge selection. I think it's just NBC, which has some stuff, but yeah,
Yeah, all the like we're not big on like the sort of like more recent sitcoms or anything. So we're like,
nah,
eh.
no. Now, it's interesting. So Netflix is kind of going through some growing pains right now as they what happened was during COVID, right? They boomed. Like everyone was subscribing because they have nothing to do but just watch, Netflix. I'm sure all the streaming services really boomed during that time. And one thing that companies always face is like, okay, you 10x'd now last year. Now this year, what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they can't sustain that level of growth, and so their investors are getting pissed off, or the new investors who kind of came in thinking that it was going to keep growing. Um, are kind of they're kind of wondering, what's the next step for Netflix? It's how are they going to sustain this growth? And I saw that they had to purge a lot of their upcoming shows just because they can't sustain them with the current plateau of growth that they're seeing.
Yeah, well, Netflix originals have always kind of been like extremely hit or miss. I feel like a
Yeah.
lot more often miss. House of Cards, when What's so interesting about Netflix is just how it really goes to show, and I think I think like 10 or 20 years from now, I don't know if Netflix is still going to be a thing. To be honest,
Oh,
um, I honestly think that it really will be a sort of a case study in how sometimes being first is not always good.
yeah,
So you had Netflix. Well, obviously they were the first to kind of like sort of like be big in the streaming, the streaming service, and that was good for a while. But after they kind of proved the model, after they kind of showed everyone that like, hey, this is something that people really like. The issue was that all of their properties were other people's stuff. It was none like they had very few originals at that point. Um, and so they were like, okay, thanks for proving that this model works. Now we're gonna take, because I remember back when like all of like the Marvel movies were on Netflix.
yeah,
Infinity War. I think that's how I originally saw Infinity War. Oh no, sorry. I watched it again like a year later after I saw it in theaters. But yeah, but then Disney was like, "Hey, thanks for letting us know that this model works. We're
yeah,
gonna take all our stuff and put them on our." So then Netflix lost all of that good stuff, and then follow suit with HBO, Paramount, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then they tried to start kind of like moving into more originals. Now, ironically, Netflix also was kind of they were kind of a trailblazer, and not only like original series, like House of Cards, I think was really the first big like streaming series that kind of showed that like, oh crap, like we can actually, I mean it didn't end well, of course.
yeah.
It like we can actually like make this a thing. And now all of these services have their own original programming. And Netflix was the first to have, I think it was Beasts of No Nation. It caused a big controversy at the Oscars when a lot of people were pissed off that Idris Elba wasn't nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And then the Oscars were like, "Well, it's a web movie. It's not
Hmm.
or it's not a real movie." So yeah, Netflix really did like sort of trailblaze a lot.
Yeah,
But because of that, sometimes being the trailblazer isn't always good. Sometimes being first
yeah.
isn't always good.
No, the transition from being a place that had everything on it when it first came out, it was fantastic. Like I used to love watching House on Netflix and a bunch of other shows.
Hell yeah.
And slowly they started taking them away. One, because they moved to their own streaming sites like Disney, but also two, these companies realize we can charge Netflix whatever the fuck we want to because they're essentially only existing because our shows are on there. So
Mhm.
I understand Netflix's move to go to more original content that they own that they don't have to keep paying for. Um, One of the problems with the Netflix series is, and I don't know if this is because they're a web series and they have like a chip on their shoulder or something to prove, but um, they tend to go all out on the first season, making like really exciting, really engaging first seasons, and then have nothing to do after that. You see that on almost every show that peters out after maybe the first 1 to 3 seasons. I think that House of Cards was the same way. Seasons 1 to 2 were fantastic. Season 3 was all right, and then we see a sharp decline after that as they just run out of plot ideas, run out of things to do. Narcos, I thought, was the same way. Many of their other shows, and
Even Stranger Things, I feel like the
yeah,
first season was big.
oh
The
yeah,
hype was still there for season two, but it was just kind of like, what are we doing? And then season
oh
three rolled
god,
around, and I think even fans were kind of like, you just keep remaking this. Like season two and season three felt like the same thing as season one, and
yeah.
now the fourth season's coming out, which apparently they spent like a fuck ton of money on. And
Oh, I
I
bet.
actually don't even know if I don't even know if the hype is still there. I think the moment's passed.
I don't know. They took a while to make it too, so it's just like, yeah, I think people have moved on. I think people have kind of seen, that the magic of Netflix originals, because they were kind of impressive when they were first coming out. It was like, oh, these are cool. These are really interesting ideas. Excuse me, but people now have kind of seen that, like, yeah, they don't really end well. And like you said, a bunch of streaming services have started doing their own originals for to mixed results. I'd say a lot of them are not good as well. I think a lot of them are pretty forgettable, but Some of them hit a chord with a certain audience. Apple TV has their own stuff going on that's pretty popular, I think, with some people. I haven't watched any of them, but and of course HBO has a huge. I mean, obviously had their own programming even way before this, but now that their platform is out there, they have even more ways to deliver it, to people. And like I said, HBO Max really has the best selection because they partnered with Time Warner. They have they have anime on there. They have DC on there. They have Turner Classic Media. Bang for buck, like you just get the most selection there, which I think is why they're doing really well.
And HBO Max, at least in that particular case, because it's a premium channel. I
Yeah,
think it's actually the only one, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Because of that, well, like Prime Video, like that's sort of a given because you
that
get
too.
it
Yeah,
with Amazon Prime, so
yeah,
like most people will get it. But with HBO Max, is that it basically doubles as a subscription to
yeah,
HBO Premium
yeah,
channel. Um, but when you like, that's how me and my girlfriend watched Succession. We would
yeah,
just log in right at 8 the same way.
yeah,
But that way you didn't have to, if you were watching on
yeah,
TV, you didn't have to like start right at 8.
yeah.
So yeah, HBO Max I think is going to be. I mean Disney Plus I think is always going to be there just because
Of
it's
course.
Disney catalog. It's kind of like people will always want to rewatch those movies. Prime Video is going to be around because of just because of what actually ironically going back to Trailblazing, Prime Video actually was the big one because Transparent. I don't know if you remember that show with Jeffrey Tambor. It was about
Mm.
Jeffrey Tambor was a transgender woman, um, and her children had to sort of like come around to the idea. It was a Amazon original series called Transparent. It won, I think, it won Jeffrey Tambor Best Actor,
Mhm.
and so that was huge. It was the first limited, like an actual streaming series to win like major awards at
Mhm.
the like. I think it won an Emmy.
Yeah.
Um, but like you said, after season 2 actually was excellent, but after that it teered off, and then Jeffrey Tambor got accused of he kind of got me too. He got accused of inappropriate behavior on set to some of the actresses, and then they had the spoilers for Transparent, even though I think most people haven't even heard of it or even remember it. They had to kill her off, the
Oh,
character
jeez.
off in the final season, and like the final season was like a movie finale. It was really weird. It's kind of the same thing with House of Cards.
Mhm.
After Kevin Spacey came out as like the creep he is, they had to do the final season without him, and it was an absolute train wreck. But even before that, House of Cards was pretty piss poor anyway.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these online series have, kind of struggled to find, their like TV has a long history of like, okay, we know how to make these, we know how to like deal with this kind of stuff. But it's almost like these online series have kind of had to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And that's really where HBO has the advantage because their series are not web series. They are HBO series, which is a long running tradition that they know how to make them, they know how to produce them, and now it's just a new way to deliver it to the audience rather than a premium cable channel. Um, and so I think that's why HBO really doesn't feel like, oh, this is a Netflix original. Like this is still just HBO. It's usually fantastic television. Not that HBO doesn't have their occasional bombs or their occasional misses, but it's just I think they have that history and that expertise there that a lot of these web companies are struggling to figure out what to do and how to stay relevant. And just like we talked about before too, with being online and people having an infinite number of things to choose from, that's why I think a lot of these shows go balls to the wall the first season and then peter out, is because you've got to do something big to capture online attention. With cable or whatever, it was like, you only had a few choices of what you could watch. So the shows could, more or less take their time because if you don't watch this, you're going to watch something else on another network. So it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, for online TV, you could watch YouTube, you could play games, you could read stuff, you could go on a forum, whatever you want to do. And a lot of these series have to really compete against that.
Well, that was you kind of hit the nail on the head, and I think that kind of goes back to that whole like the Beast of No Nation controversy. There is still even so like this sort of like stigma against sort of like like quote unquote web series, which is stupid because it's like whether a television show premieres on Netflix or on the you know FX or the actual TV channel, like what difference does that make? And yet
Mhm.
people still kind of have and I in part I think it is because with the web series they have become so oversaturated. Like every single service has like their all their original series, which are kind of like you said, they're kind of like what was that oh yeah, there's Apple TV, which like
Yeah,
me and Lynn like we never watch it,
yeah, I never
but
watched it.
she has it for free, so that's why we watch it. We have it.
Mm.
What was that? The morning show with like Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston or something,
Mm.
and Reese
I don't
Witherspoon.
remember that one.
I don't think anyone does. It kind of was like because like when it was announced to like Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston, everyone's like whoa, and then it was like people saw it and was like okay, like
Yeah,
it
and
was
that's, I mean, that's
pretty
a
basic.
perfect example too of, right, like, yeah, I mean, you can even get big stars on this thing. If it was on cable, back in the day, it probably would have, been really memorable. But just online, unless you have the quality or you do something really exciting, it's like people don't really pay attention because, again, there's a million things going on online all the time that you could be paying attention to or watching or enjoying. You could watch small creators like us do something, entertain you for an hour, like you wonderful people are doing right now. And so, yeah, I think that in the future of content online, I think, again, we'll see a lot of big, studio stuff like this too. But I think there's something to be said for like smaller scope stuff that's like more limited and not just trying to like copy television, but just trying to provide like entertainment for the viewer. And there's a million ways to do that online rather than just the traditional, like, trying to copy film or television.
Hmm. And then, of course, you run into the problem of, and people sort of, someone pointed this out with Ozark. So Ozark is on Netflix, and they're coming up on the second half of their last season, the
Mm,
finale. And the show itself has been pretty well acclaimed, I
yeah.
think, for the most part, especially the last season. I think it's been decently acclaimed. Nothing like greatest show ever, but like pretty decently
Yeah.
given it's I think it's actually improved over time too. Um, someone compared I saw a tweet about it. Someone compared the hype around Euphoria. So when Euphoria came out, it was week to week on HBO Max. That's how me and my
Yeah.
girlfriend watch it. And we love Euphoria. We kind of know like it's kind of shitty. Oh, it's like often really shitty, but it's just kind of fun. It's kind of
Yeah.
event television. Um, what was interesting was that when you're watching when like during the run of Euphoria, the last season, um, the week in between each episode, people were like
Yeah.
talking about it. Like there was like tons of discourse, tons of memes, all this stuff, all this engagement to get people hyped for the next episode. And someone pointed out with Ozark, the issue was that they released the entire block all in one go, which obviously did create a little bit of hype leading up to it. But about a week later, anyone who was like really passionate about the show had already watched the whole
Yeah.
thing. And then and it's not to say like the show didn't do it good, it wasn't
Yeah.
good or anything. It probably was better than Euphoria. It's just that you don't have that consistent
Yeah.
spacing out of to keep people engaged. And now we see these web series starting to release episodes one by one, week by
Yeah.
week. And it's like, okay, now you guys are just reinventing cable television, which is like wasn't the entire point to not do this.
Here's where I think I'm gonna get some backlash, is that I much prefer week to week over releasing it all at once. And I understand that that's a super hypocritical thing for me to say, because I'm someone who's always like, no, put the like be convenient for the viewer. Let them experience it however they want. If I choose to space it out, myself watch one episode a week, that's my choice. And um I completely understand that this take is like hypocritical to that point of view, but I think exactly what you talked about for Euphoria, like the weight and the talking with other people and the community that it creates is what I enjoy about television much more than usually even just watching it. I like being part of the fandom. I like talking about it, like having theories, posting online, having the excitement week to week. And I think that one of the changes that like streaming has like affected how we view television is for a lot of communities, it's kind of killed the whole, the water cooler talk. Like every week, at work, you'd be talking to the water cooler about what happened on Friends last, week, or whatever. Because if you didn't watch it right at that moment, you were lost. So everyone like stopped and they tuned in. But the problem with streaming is like now you try to have a conversation about a show and they're like, oh no, wait, I haven't watched season 2 yet. I'm planning on watching it, binge watching it later. So don't talk to me about this. And no, I'm over here. And like it's really split up like a lot of these communities, which I mean it's not the end of the world or anything like that. But I think it's an interesting look at how like the community around a lot of television shows has evolved over time.
It's interesting you point out too, because that might actually it might actually um, result, at least for a certain amount of the audience, because people who are passionate about the show, like people who would like binge it like in a single sitting, will still watch it week to week. They're
Yeah.
not gonna not watch it.
No.
However, something could be said about like you mentioned, because like I kind of felt that way about. I remember that with like Game of Thrones, like
Mhm.
that week in between episodes.
That was
That week
awesome.
was fun. Like it wasn't like a lot. I wasn't like at my computer on Reddit or anything, but just like talking with friends,
I was
like
on the Reddit.
yeah. Or just like on Twitter, like just kind of like shooting the shit and like, oh, it's gonna happen next. And
Yeah.
even that little bit of engagement was just kind of fun. It was kind of like let's get hype. Breaking Bad, when the final season aired too, was very similar.
Oh yeah.
Looking at theories like what's gonna happen. And again, none of us like it's not like we wanted to spoil the show for each other. We just wanted to talk about it, and
Oh
it
yeah.
was fun. But now I almost wonder if that the availability, it's like if the entire season gets dropped in an instant, I almost wonder if it like sometimes discourages people from watching it, because they'll be like, instead of like, oh, I have to watch Sunday because then the episode's out,
Yeah.
now it's like, oh well,
Yeah.
it's
Save it.
on Netflix, I can watch it whenever. And then
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 weeks go by and then they're like, oh yeah, I never got around to watching that. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
hmm.
People have so much backlogs now. Of like, oh yeah, I get to. I'm the same way too. It's like I have plenty of shows that I'm like, oh yeah, I'll get to it eventually because they can always come back. So I don't want television to be an obligation to people, and it shouldn't be. But I just think it's fun to have that level of engagement with the community, and not to say that it can't exist without it, because like Sopranos is a show that's been off the air for 20 years now, and you can watch it all whenever you want to, and there's still a vibrant community of people coming in and talking about it, sharing memes, sharing ideas. But yeah, I mean, for some of these shows, the excitement is more fun than the actual episode themselves, and um, I do enjoy having that aspect of it.
You make a good point too, which is interesting. And I don't really know, and I think I even maybe put this on the spreadsheet for other topics. I almost wonder if like like any sort of like golden age of television is done. I almost, because like it is interesting to see the two shows that I see that still have like a very dedicated fan base are The Sopranos and The Wire.
Mhm.
Those are two shows that like I'll just see people dropping memes like all over the place. They've become like part of like sort of like the cultural like lexicon in a way.
Mhm.
Breaking Bad to some extent, but even
Mhm.
Breaking Bad, I feel like it kind of isn't around. I mean, Game of Thrones, it would be if it
Yeah.
didn't end like it ended. But even some Seinfeld is also a show where I feel
Mhm.
like the memes. I just see like its presence is always felt
Yeah.
wherever I am. Um, but yeah, I feel like nowadays, like like there's plenty of shows where I'll watch them and I'm like, hey, that was a good series, that was a good show, limited series. But I'm just like, why doesn't
Yeah.
it have the staying power anymore? I don't know why.
You're right. I think the golden age really, I think, was from probably 1999 till about maybe 2010, 2012, whenever like, because there was an overlapping time of like Sopranos, The Wire, Breaking Bad. They were all airing overlapping with each other. And you could throw other shows like Mad Men into the mix, Boardwalk Empire, some other, pretty hit shows too. But it seemed like it all kind of petered out maybe around 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. And there's not been like a giant that's taken over. Game of Thrones came close. It had very strong cultural relevance for a long time. Um, but yeah, we haven't seen any really critically acclaimed dramas or anything that have just completely shifted the landscape. I mean, I might say Game of Thrones actually, because even if it's bad, it definitely changed television forever. That's why there's a million shows copying it. So you can maybe throw that into the mix, but I think we're in a weird cultural moment right now with the culture war going on. That it's like it's hard to have like to say something right now without being scared of offending one group or scared of pissing off the other group. I just think politics and culture have kind of put a stranglehold on art, to the point where I think people like it's hard to have a voice. Your voice tends to really like all these shows have now had to think about like where do we fit in this culture rather than just telling a story and letting the characters kind of just naturally evolve and progress. Like The Wire could not be made today with how complicated and nuanced the story it is. They would have had to stick to one narrative or the other. They would never
Yeah.
have gotten approved. Um, so I don't know. It's a weird time period we live in, and I hope we're coming out of it. Maybe the fact that Daddy Elon has bought Twitter means that the culture war is over now, and we're finally free.
Oh God, I don't even. Well, it's funny because like I have a feeling nothing is going to change. Twitter's just
No,
going to
probably
be
not.
so shitty as always. But yeah, because I'm trying to think of like another show. I mean, well, actually, the one exception I'll make is Mr. Robot. That's a
Mm,
show for me that I think is like, and I think the shame of it is just that it just didn't get the notoriety it deserved. I think that
yeah.
stands among Sopranos and Wired here in terms of
Hmm.
because what Mr. Robot did was, at least for me, it really showed the it really showed the merits of kind of like planning out your seasons.
Hmm.
Because I was telling a friend about Mr. Robot, and the way it works is after you watch season one, you immediately you find out something at the end of season one that makes you want to go back and watch season one again.
Hmm.
At the end of season two, you find out something that not only makes you want to watch season two, but also watch season one again to figure out, oh, because this. And the best part is that at the very end of the show, there's a twist ending that reframes the entire context of the show that makes you want to go back and rewatch it, and
Yeah.
it becomes a completely different show.
Yeah.
And that to me is what I've always wanted to see in
Yeah.
a television show. That's sort of like, you know, the harmony of like being
Hmm.
able to like, change things as you go, but having like a coherent vision.
Yeah.
And I just, and like, kind of like to your point, I don't really see that anymore because everyone's concerned with like, oh, is this going to get renewed? Oh, we have to be the next we have to be the next Game of Thrones or the next
Hmm.
X show. What's this show like compared to other shows? And it's like,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I feel like shows have, again, like you said, they've learned to copy like techniques and structure from these really critically acclaimed shows, but again what they're missing is that core of like, here is the story we want to tell, we want to be authentic. We want to be real with what we're telling, and that aspect has gotten lost in today's culture and the media, and again, just the general trend of like we have to really stand out and we have to go balls to the wall in order to get viewership or we're gonna get canceled or whatever. I think that like I think the next like great culture defining thing is not going to be one of these like big production Netflix shows or HBO shows or whatever. I think it's going to come from like a lower budget thing. Like the online space is going to allow creator like some creator to make something on a low budget that they're filming like, you know, just with a small budget with a small team or whatever, but because their voice is so authentic and real, I think that is the next thing that's going to be this incredible masterpiece. I'm really excited. I don't think we've necessarily seen that with the internet yet. Like there have been some cool series that have come out of like solo creators or not like amateur creators, but as as the technology just gets cheaper and cheaper, like we're both talking on like technology that probably costs a couple $100, you could totally make something really cool with all just this stuff. I think if there's a creator out there who's got the vision and the voice, they could make something really special.
Yeah. Well, it's so much harder because like, and this isn't to say that like independent film is not hard to break into, like, or I should say, it's not easy to make a film.
Mhm.
Like,
Oh
it's a
yeah.
very involved process. However, um, I I can't. I don't think has that ever happened. Has that ever been an independent television series? Of course, there has been an independent, like there have been independent television pilots, and they
Hmm.
sell that to studios. But the issue with that is like if it's like the film itself, then you can sell it to distributors,
Yeah.
get it picked up by a production company, and the film is done. The
Hmm.
problem is that with the TV pilots getting picked up as like independently made
Yeah.
pilots, they get sold to a production company or like a
Yeah.
distributor, and then because it's only the pilot, all of a sudden, oh okay, so like the rest of the show isn't made yet, so we can make whatever we want.
Yeah.
That's actually why you see a lot of times in television shows the pilot is in such stark contrast
Oh yeah.
to the rest of the show. Like you can
Yeah.
tell, like you can almost tell when you're watching the pilot for a lot of shows, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing, um, but it it does kind of reek of it's it's no longer this like singular vision from like a creative team of passionate individuals. Now it's sort of like a communal
Yeah.
corporate sort of thing, or
Yeah.
at least those two meshing.
Yeah. I so the one example that comes to my mind is John Graham's RB and the Chiefs series. I know John. I think he's a great guy. I've followed that show. It's a machinima series from way back in the day, but it's still going on even today. And he's someone who's just been doing it like alone, um, just with him and a few voice actors that he hires here and there. And I think that his series has the same quality as television. I think it's as good as television, but just done on like a shoestring budget using, just his camera, again, the machinima, the Halo engine, and telling a fantastic story. I definitely don't think it has the recognition that it deserves to be like, really culturally relevant or anything like that. But I think John is a perfect example of like you can tell really, really good stories on an online series with no budget. And again, this kind of comes back to our thing before, which is again the prejudice against these big Netflix, like programs. People still kind of look down on that when they shouldn't. I also think people shouldn't look down on really amateur, low budget stuff that individual people are making, because the benefit of having the low budget and having just a small team is you don't have that corporate influence that makes a lot of television shows suck. You don't have investors who you have to kowtow to, and placate. You can just be authentic to your voice, and maybe that voice doesn't have the huge mass market appeal that a lot of these studios are looking for, but that's what makes it so great. And like I said, I think I would love to see more people with that voice creating stuff online, because there's more room for it than ever on YouTube, on other platforms that are coming out. And I think, again, we could see some really fantastic stuff come out of someone's limited budget but unlimited imagination.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's sort of, and like I understand because there is sort of a there's a give and take, right? Where there is a not just in the sense that like obviously you need a certain program, you need it to be marketable,
Yeah,
you know, like even the best shows ever, like Breaking Bad, The
yeah.
Wire, Sopranos, they still had marketable. Maybe not The
Oh yeah.
Wire actually, and The Wire was like the one, but then
Yeah,
again, The Wire didn't actually do very well during its run. It only
yeah.
really gained prominence after the fact, or years later. Um, but like these shows still have to have a hook. They still have to be
Yeah.
they still have to be marketable or like attractive to some extent. And sometimes if you're kind of like an independent creator, um, and this kind of goes with film too, you can have a really cool idea, but
Mhm.
you don't really have the experience to kind of morph that idea into sort of like a finished product. And that's especially the case with television series, because
Mhm.
as you point out earlier, one of the big issues you see with television series is that, well, there's two cases that kind of usually it kind of suck. It's hard because you kind of fall into like this one of two alleys, and both kind of have their pros and cons. One is that you have a really interesting idea or a really like solid vision of the show, but it takes time to build. Breaking
Mhm.
Bad was a perfect example where like this like the first two seasons of Breaking Bad are excellent. Don't get me wrong, but Breaking Bad really is a show where it's a slow burn. Where
Yeah.
personally, I think it gets better as it goes, and you really have to invest in the characters and this premise. And
Mhm.
if you do, same with The Wire in a sense. And if you do, it's very rewarding. But but like Breaking Bad was at risk of being canceled through the first four seasons of its run, like until the final season, which is
Mhm.
hard. The fact that that show finished or like ended up becoming as big as it was nothing short of a miracle. Um, but then the second option, and you kind of touched upon this, is that shows will kind of like start off with like a really interesting like pilot or even like a first season, but the creators didn't really give a lot of thought to, okay, how can we continue this for like 3 or 4 or 5 seasons?
Mhm.
Which is why there are a lot of shows that have like they're really Homeland is a show that I think
Mhm.
I remember when like season one came out, people were like, "Fuck yeah, Homeland's awesome," and then season two was just like, "Where are we going?
Yeah.
Like where are we?" And now it's like I think it's finished, but it had like 8 seasons,
Mhm.
and spoiler alert for Homeland, they kill off one of the main characters at like the end of season three, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, stop it. No, like, you clearly don't have. Dexter was a show that went on way too long.
Mhm.
Um,
It's
there are a
back
number
now
of.
too.
Wait, which one?
Dexter's back now too.
Oh God, yeah, and I
Yeah.
heard that it wasn't good, right? New Blood was it?
I don't know. I watched Dexter back in the day. I wasn't like super into it or anything. I heard some people are like, "Oh yeah, it's a return to form of like the early seasons," but I don't care. Like there comes a point where it's just like I've moved on. Like I don't give a shit about this. But I'm sure some people really enjoy it. It's an interesting example too. Your intro sting from Kevin Smith. Um, from Clerks. That's the one I was from, right? There's nothing more satisfying than criticizing other people.
Oh, nothing more exhilarating than pointing out the shortcomings of others.
Yeah, from Clerks. That's a great example again too of someone who just did it on a shoestring budget. I know this was a film and different than a television series with a long running thing, but like that's a guy who just from his own vision, his own kind of voice, created a whole fucking media empire from it. Again, by working with big companies too for distribution and stuff like that. And I don't like all of Kevin Smith's stuff, but again, he had a voice, and I think that low budget independent look to him and the attitude from him is what made him, so popular among a large group of people who just kind of, don't like the whole corporate, clean look of a lot of studio films.
Yeah. Well, it's and Clerks 2 was like important for a number of reasons. It kind of came out along, what was it, 94 or
Somewhere in there, yeah.
90, something like that.
Yeah.
So it came out along in between, Tarantino's films. It came out,
Mm-hmm.
Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, Linklater's early
Mm-hmm.
films. Um, and so that was sort of when, you know, it was coming off the 80s where like they were all these films were like these big blockbusters, and they were trying so hard to be marketable and like being
Mm-hmm.
super marketable, that these like fresh films of like just kind of like people doing whatever, like Clerks, like I don't mean to say this is like a disparaging um thing, but Clerks is not a very polished film. It's not a very
No.
like it's very rough around the edges.
Oh yeah.
But at the time, like if it was released today, I don't think it would be anything. But at the time, it was just a thing where, and especially the like young up and coming filmmakers, it was very inspiring to think like, hey, even if like look at this, we can make a film and we can make
Yeah.
something out of basically nothing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that context I think is usually lost on people. And to go back, it kind of goes back to your point about the next sort of like really big series that's going to change things for television. The one thing that really bugged me about the whole blockbuster era, which was after Jaws and Star Wars came out, and then like studios started like creaming their pants, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey man, we have to have the next Star Wars and Jaws. And then the 80s, that's when we got the 80s with all the blockbusters and all like the,
Mm-hmm.
you know, vacuum sealed product of trying to market as hard as possible. What really bugged me about that is that they all they took the wrong lesson from Star Wars and Jaws. The reason Star Wars was so big was because it was unlike anything anyone had ever
Mm-hmm.
seen. It was like, hey, this kick-ass film from this like absolute crazy dude named George Lucas, and even Jaws too. Like, hey, we've never seen anything like this. That's why they were so popular. And instead of and we're seeing this now with Game of Thrones. So like, hey, when you want to be the next Game of Thrones, but now they're just making Game of Thrones clones. Like Amazon's Lord of the Rings series is gonna tank
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Of course.
Um, and there have been others, but we don't even remember them because they came and went so
Oh
quickly.
yeah.
And what they don't understand is that the next Game of Thrones is going to be unlike not like Game of Thrones at all,
Mm-hmm.
and unlike anything you've ever seen. And that's what the bigwigs don't understand.
Yeah.
And I get it; they want something that they know is
Yeah.
marketable, but they don't understand that the reason this was marketable in the first place was because no one thought it was marketable. If I made
What
any sense in that, but
what's so
hopefully
frustrating about that too is the fact that this is a lesson that they have failed to learn every single time.
so
It's like
many fucking times.
like the Lord of the Rings, like Lord of the Rings is a perfect example too of like there was a bunch of movies that came out trying to be like the Lord of the Rings movies and they all failed. The Narnia films were like they tried to make a giant series out of it, didn't work, and that's
Yeah,
because
whatever
it
happened with that?
it always they always just want to copy it, but you have to do something original, and that's why I think that like we're coming off of an era of big budget movies like the Marvel, the Disney acquisition, the Star Wars stuff. It's been an era of big CGI blockbusters for the last 10 years. And I think people are getting really sick of it. I mean, this is exactly why we talked about why Marvel's in kind of like a decline phase right now. And I think that we're ready for another 90s era. And it's so great you point out Tarantino because you're exactly right. He completely fits into that mix. Like, yeah, Reservoir Dogs had, I think, $1 million budget, but that was a very low budget for the blockbuster that it was. And it's just because he made connections in Hollywood, and got his script in the hands of the right people. He was working at a video store at the time, and just had a passion for film and a very unique voice that no one had ever seen before. He completely reinvented the crime genre with his thing. And so I think, I hope at least, no one knows the future, but I hope we're getting into another era like that where it's like we've seen the big budget corporate Disney bullshit, Amazon bullshit. We're ready for, like, some more independent stuff, some interesting voices, and for people to do something new, because we've been being fed the same, you know, clones of big popular stuff for the last 10 years. And at least for me, I'm ready to see some really new shit here. So I hope that's the era we're getting into. Of course, we never know what's going to happen, but like I said, I'm hopeful that with the internet and, a way for people to get their movies to people, Patreon, a million ways to support it, GoFundMe, that, we can see some new creative voices come out of the mix.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we were just talking about Reservoir Dogs in Discord earlier, and how um I actually think it doesn't really. I don't, as a film in and of itself, I don't think it holds up that well. But
Heresy.
I know. But I mean, like, I think Pulp Fiction is a lot more of a polished, like, it
Oh,
emulates
no,
what.
no, 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 no.
Oh, absolutely. I think
Oh,
we
no, no,
can have a.
I'm not disagreeing with your point, but like, oh my god, you don't like, Reservoir Dogs?
Well, I like the film, but I think it is. I think it's shown its age. I think it's a film where I can watch it and I'm like, it's very similar to kind of like a lot of like very like sort of like groundbreaking films, because like you get hyped for them, it's so groundbreaking, and then you watch it and you're kind of like, but it's because you have to put it into the context in which it was released. I kind of felt the same way about Breathless. I mean, Breathless
I
is
haven't seen
known
that.
as like an incredibly. It kind of broke all the rules back in the '60s. You know,
Yeah.
it completely changed the landscape of film. But if you were to watch it today, it's like, I mean, it's good. It's excellent, but it's been the techniques it kind of sort of the same way Citizen Kane did. Well, Citizen Kane not so much. That I think Citizen Kane really does still hold up in terms of its
Mhm.
techniques, but I think definitely with Breathless, that's a film where like you've seen it emulated so many times that the stuff in Breathless that was like groundbreakingly shocking was, it's looking back on it today is just like commonplace. And so it's not really fair to judge the film in terms of its legacy
Mhm.
without that context. And I kind of feel the same way about Reservoir Dogs, where it's sort of, I it again, I understand why it was such a big like holy fuck moment, but also I think the film is flawed in many respects.
Okay, so I'll respectfully disagree with this. Reservoir Dogs is in my top three favorite films of all time. More than Pulp Fiction. I like Pulp Fiction, and I agree with you. It is a more polished film, but to me, what Reservoir Dogs was able to do with the limited nature of the film, I felt like Pulp Fiction was a little bit too indulgent. Like he had a little bit too much like freedom to take the elements from Reservoir Dogs he did really well, nonlinear storytelling, violence, pop culture references, and just turn that shit up to 11. Pulp Fiction's a still really good movie, but I just love the limited nature of Reservoir Dogs. I've talked about this before. I really really love when movies and TV shows are just like keep it tight, keep it like really like in scope of what the film is. The beats all revolve around the same, rushing towards the same kind of ending there. Um, I don't know. I just love that film, man. I love it so goddamn much. It's I like other like real Tarantino stuff too. Like I think Jackie Brown is like one of the most slept on films that Tarantino has ever done. It's a fantastic picture. Much better than I think some of his more like really exciting hits like Inglorious Bastards or Django. I think Jackie Brown with Reservoir Dogs is like up there with the best thing he's ever done.
Yeah, Jackie Brown really does get sort of like a bad rap in terms of his filmography. You point out something interesting there too, because um, I do agree in the sense that like you also have to take into account, at least, or maybe you shouldn't have to when you're discussing how good a
No.
film is, but at least I do when I'm judging like how impressed I am with a film,
Hmm.
taking into account its like financial constraints.
Yeah.
One film, for example, that I love is Primer, the time travel film, which was made. Let me just make sure it's
Yeah.
correct because I always have to kind of, yeah, it was made for $7,000.
Jesus.
Um, and that is one of the most like original, like it's an extremely
Hmm.
good movie. However, it does have cracks. It does have very glaring flaws. However, knowing it was made by one guy
Yeah.
and made like with like five actors and made for
Yeah.
7 grand and it was that good, that just takes it to a whole other aside, like again, still a great movie on its own
Yeah.
merit. But with that taking that into account, it's like, holy shit, this thing is like
Yeah.
this is unbelievable.
And I also want to say that I didn't. You could totally have whatever opinion you want. Like there's no right or wrong answer to any of this. I just was like, I really like that film, but I think it's like again example of like a flawed natural diamond versus like a perfect synthetic one. It's like these big studios make really polished, really like perfectly visual movies that just don't have the heart and soul of something, like you'd find with like a lot of these small creators who have a voice. And yeah, it's going to be rough around the edges. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be flaws in the diamond, but that's what almost gives it more character than something that's totally sterile, totally without vision, without a voice to come across. Um, that's just, I don't know, what I'd prefer. And I don't know. I like most of these directors that I really enjoy. I love their early work much more than their later one. Scorsese is a great example. Tarantino, Kevin Smith, just a lot of these guys. The longer they went on and the more corporate they became, the less and less I enjoyed their pictures.
Yeah. Even I feel the same way with Tarantino. It's like I feel like even him has sort of. I actually think, and people think I'm nuts for this. I actually think my favorite films of Tarantino are the Kill Bill films. Because I think that was just sort of his. He had reached a point where he kind of like gotten away from his sort of like, there was like a rawness to Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs and even
Hmm.
Jackie Brown, which I really like. I do enjoy, but Kill Bill was when like he kind of went like full sort of
Yeah,
like very polished cinema
yeah,
mode. But he also wasn't. It wasn't to the point where like he was too far up his own ass. I think
hmm,
like around it was. I think it was Inglorious Bastards where I was like, all right, Tarantino, tone it
yeah,
back a little. And then he
hmm,
just kind of kept going. And I like Django Unchained's a great movie. Hateful Eight's a great movie. Even though that one's I think, a bit overindulgent.
hmm,
Um, and then Once Upon a Time in America, that's a film where I'm kind of also like, I understand he wanted to make like, a Rio Bravo esque like hangout movie, Dazed and Confused. I don't know. I just feel like he's such a good filmmaker and writer, but I think he tries to make his films so Tarantino-y that it actually makes them worse. Where if he just
yeah,
like Kill Bill, I think is a film where he has like had a blast with, like he just like
yeah,
went for it, and then every subsequent film, Inglorious Bastard, Django, Hateful Eight, Once Upon a Time, he keeps trying to like it's almost as if like half the film is like Tarantino making a good film, and
hmm,
the other half like a freshman film student trying to copy Tarantino sometimes. Like he
yeah,
almost makes it. I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but like he almost kind of like he almost sucks his own cock a little bit too
yeah.
hard in some cases where I'm just like, dude, if you just didn't do that, the film would be a lot better.
Yeah, I agree that I think like from Inglorious Bastards on, there are parts of this film like you could be like, you could have cut that. We didn't need this part. This didn't need to be as long. And I again, I think I still love Tarantino. I think his voice is still there, but it's like again, I think it's the limits and the restraint that makes a good picture. And I think once you reach this point where you can really do anything, a lot of that creativity and a lot of that voice stop coming through nearly as much. and the money in this and the the production starts to come through more and more. Which is not to say that again studios still make good movies that I enjoy, and and big budget pictures can still be good. I don't want to say that I'm this like art house hipster who only watches foreign French films from the '60s. Like I still watch blockbusters, I still enjoy them. Um, but as we've harped on many times in many episodes on here, it has to be authentic. It has to be real. Otherwise, what the fuck is the point of even watching it?
Exactly.
I think we're up on our hour here. I think this has been an interesting discussion. We've talked a lot about streaming and a lot about I think just studios and film in general. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Yeah, we kind of got away from our original topic, but I'm okay with that. Like we
Yeah,
usually
we're
do
yeah.
that. Yeah, I kind of going back to what I had said earlier. I kind of wonder if like Netflix in particular is going to be around
Mhm.
um in the next like 10 years or so. The DVD aspect of its business, which I don't think like I think that's still around, but I don't
It
know how
is,
many
yeah.
people.
You can still
Yeah,
order DVD, not from like their main Netflix account, but yeah, if you have a separate like Netflix mail thing, and they have a lot more selection on there, I hear, than the main Netflix channel does. But again, who the fuck has a DVD player anymore?
and the problem is too is like nowadays you can rent
Mm,
so like basically any film you can get online if you're not like
yeah.
again like even aside from pirating, there are so like you can find the film you're
YouTube even
looking
has
for.
movies now you can rent and buy.
Yeah, and it's like so that aspect is gone, and now it's just well, funny enough, one of Netflix's biggest draws was, or the only thing really keeping it afloat for so long was its international programming.
Hmm.
So I wonder if maybe that'll keep up. Maybe like
I
it'll still stay
I don't
afloat from
think
that.
so,
But
man. Like they had to cancel all their Indian shows because they don't think it's sustaining the level of growth
oh,
that
did they cancel some of their international? Because I remember I heard they dropped a lot of series. Where that
Oh yeah, a
included?
lot of their Indian. I saw the headline. A lot
Oh,
of their Indian upcoming Indian programming they had to drop because they just don't think it's going to sustain it the way that they have a lot of Korean and a lot of like Asian international shows on there. My fiance watches a lot. She loves Thai dramas and Korean dramas on there, but I don't think that's enough to sustain a platform like Netflix that again has these huge expectations because it's like a big studio thing with investors and all the things like that. They could just be a platform that caters to one niche or the other, but because they're so big, I just think that the bigger you get, the harder you fall. And we're going to see a lot of these big tech companies collapse under the weight of their expectations and their investors expectations. And it'll give rise to a bunch of new smaller studios like there's a bunch of them out there, but yeah, this has been an interesting discussion. Again, we strayed from the topic, but we always do that.
yeah.
We're not going to stick to one specific thing. We're just going to talk about whatever comes to our minds. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Again, apologize for it being late. That's my fuck up, but hopefully it shouldn't happen again. And we will talk to you when the next episode of No One's a Critic comes out soon.
Take care, y'all.